Hey guys, I am the Comics Kid 2099, and it's been a little while, but I'm here to talk a little bit about the next Age of Apocalypse book. So far, I have talked about the Prelude and Volume 1. These are the complete Age of Apocalypse epic books. That is what these are called. This is Volume 2. Even though this is Volume 2, this is actually where the Age of Apocalypse officially begins, because the Prelude was the Legion Quest and all of the stories that are barely connected to the Legion Quest, and then Volume 1 was basically all of the Age of Apocalypse comics that came out after the Age of Apocalypse was completed. So you had like a 4-issue miniseries devoted to Blink, and this was set before the beginning of the Age of Apocalypse storyline started. And then you would have like an issue of X-Men that was a flashback, and then another issue of X-Men that was a flashback. Stuff like that. This is where the meat of this event really begins. And I don't really have a whole lot to say here, because while this is where it all begins, it's kind of really scattershot in the way it is presented, because there were 9 4-issue miniseries that comprised the Age of Apocalypse. So all of the X-Men comics that had been going on in the 616 universe, they officially ended for 4 months, and all of those comics were replaced by other comics. So Cable became X-Man, X-Force became Gambit and the Externals, Adjectiveless X-Men became Amazing X-Men, Uncanny X-Men became Astonishing X-Men, X-Factor became Factor X, Excalibur became Excalibur, etc., stuff like that. This basically has like 1 or 2 issues from all of those series. So right here we've got X-Men Alpha, which was kind of like one of the bookend issues for the whole event. Then you've got Age of Apocalypse The Chosen. That was kind of just a files on some of the main characters from the point of view of Apocalypse. If you are pretty familiar with the X-Men, you really wouldn't have to read that. I read through the whole Chosen issue anyway, just to make sure, but it really isn't anything special. It's just one of those things that you would find in the 90s, where it's like, oh, okay, this character, he thinks this of that character, but it's really just a summary of all of these characters that are in that issue. Then you have Generation Next, Issue 1, Astonishing X-Men, Issue 1, Excalibur, Issue 1, Gambit and the Externals, 2 issues, Weapon X, 2 issues, Amazing X-Men, 2 issues, Factor X, 2 issues, and X-Man, 1 issue. So it's really hard for me to just sit down here and review this book, because there's so many things going on at once. Now, before I started reading these in trade, I had read maybe a third of all of the Age of Apocalypse stuff in single issues, and I was always under the impression that each miniseries kind of stood on its own, and then you could read it all together and it's like, okay, this is a large world. But actually, some of these minis kind of are really interconnected, and I'm pretty impressed with how well they managed to pull this off. You've got stuff happening in the Weapon X title, which was a replacement for the ongoing Wolverine title, and that stuff directly ties into what's going on with Amazing X-Men. And then in Amazing X-Men, they're referencing what the Astonishing X-Men team is doing. And then you've got Gambit and the Externals. They're doing something that is hugely important for Magneto and his group of rebels. And then the Generation Next team, they're doing something that is also hugely important, and you wouldn't think that some of these satellite titles would be as important as they are. In fact, I would say the Gambit and the Externals and Generation Next, I would say both of those are more important than some of the main titles like Astonishing X-Men and Amazing X-Men. Basically what's going on here, in the X-Men Alpha issue, we find out that Bishop, who is from the 616 timeline, remember in the Legion Quest, he traveled 20 years back in time to the day that Professor X was murdered, and then Bishop actually stayed in the past, and then he aged 20 years. So now we've got a 20 years older Bishop, and he remembers stuff from the 616 timeline, but his mind is all shattered and he's basically insane. And then he finds Magneto and the X-Men, and then basically through a little bit of contrivance, Rogue is able to touch Bishop and remember stuff. And somehow, I don't entirely understand how this happens, but somehow Magneto is also able to see into Bishop's mind, and then Magneto realizes that maybe there's a way where they can restore reality so that the Age of Apocalypse doesn't exist anymore, and the 616 reality will go back to being the main reality. It's a little bit hokey because we know there is a multiverse. There are many different realities, so it's a little strange that these guys are trying to erase this reality because there's many realities. So what's to say that the 616 reality is the reality? What if it's just a reality in the multiverse? But they don't really talk about that, and that's okay. So then when Magneto finds out that the Age of Apocalypse is not the real timeline, he thinks maybe they can pull a Terminator sort of thing and avert all of this massacre and bloodshed and stuff. And so then that's basically what kicks off all of these 4-issue minis. So Generation Next, the teenage superheroes who replaced Generation X in the Age of Apocalypse, they have been sent to rescue Illyana Rasputin from the slave pits. And basically, Illyana, she's a teleporter. She can use her abilities to kind of help them in the grand scheme of getting rid of this awful reality. And then you've got Gambit and the Externals. Their mission is to steal the M'Kraan crystal. And they will use this thing, which is kind of like the center of all realities. And then they can kind of jumpstart this thing so that they can set right what once went wrong. And like I said, these two minis, the Generation Next and Gambit and the Externals, they really feel a lot more necessary than like Amazing X-Men, which is where we find out that although Magneto believes that they really do need to erase the Age of Apocalypse, he also thinks, well, just in case this is all a fool's errand, I'm going to go send you guys to go and stop Abyss from killing humans over here. And we know that the Age of Apocalypse is not the right reality, so a 4-issue miniseries where a team of X-Men go and fight one of the Horsemen of Apocalypse doesn't really feel important in the grand scheme of things. But what's important is that you enjoy the stories, and for the most part, I really did enjoy most of these stories. Some of them are a little heavy on the captions, some of them are paced kind of wonky, where you read an entire issue and you realize, hey, nothing really happened here at all. Some of them are a lot better than others. But overall, I would definitely say that this is the best of the Age of Apocalypse books so far. So if by any chance you have not read the Prelude volume that includes the Legion Quest storyline, or if you have not read Volume 1, which is basically just prequel stuff that you do not need at all, I would highly recommend that you go ahead and pick up Age of Apocalypse, the Complete Epic Book 2. Go ahead and pick that up because that's really where the meat of the story begins. And you might be a little disappointed if you're getting this at cover price or even a little cheaper than that. You might be disappointed that none of these stories actually conclude. This definitely is something where it's going for like 15 issues and then it just stops. You do have to get volumes 3 and 4 if you want the complete story, but I'm sure that if you enjoy this, that's not going to be a problem for you at all. It's not a problem for me because I love X-Men stuff and I want to have as much of the X-Men as I can at my fingertips, and so I knew going into this that I was going to want to have all of the Age of Apocalypse stuff. And I do, so that's not a problem for me. And if you are anything like me, if you love the X-Men, then you're probably going to want to have all of the Age of Apocalypse stuff. So this being not a complete story probably isn't going to bother you very much. So that's about all I have to say about this book. Like I said, there's not really a lot to review here because this isn't a complete story. This is really 9 incomplete stories that, for the most part, they all kind of twain into each other and they form one large epic, which I wasn't really expecting. I thought this was going to be 9 kind of separate stories that kind of sort of have something to do with each other, but they don't really, and I was pleasantly surprised there. So I do recommend that you find this book, pick it up if you are interested in some alternate reality X-Men stuff. If you like stories like House of M, Age of X, or Age of Ultron, all of those books really owe their existence to the Age of Apocalypse. So if you want to kind of see where it all began, I would suggest picking up the Age of Apocalypse. And that's about all I have to say in this video. So I hope that you liked this video. If you did, I would recommend that you like, share, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you guys tomorrow with a different kind of video. I'll catch you later. Have a good day.